So now that we're in the off season and the draft is upcoming, I wanted to do a power rankings as I see it, and it is based off the power rankings from the last time I did one. So I did one, and then everybody lost their minds that, oh, you shouldn't be doing it anymore, and I'm like, you know what, it's just not worth it. So I didn't do them for about a month now, and so I looked at the ranking I had, moved some stuff around, and I wanted to discuss where I see teams are at right now, and touch on some rumors that I've heard because people keep asking in comment sections or through Instagram or Twitter, what do you think about this one? What do you think about? Most rumors don't come true. They just don't. And then the big trade will happen out of nowhere. It'll be guys that we don't even know are rumored to be up for trade, and everything is usually quite chaotic in the off season around free agency time. The 31st team is, of course, Ottawa. Now, they were 31st at the end of the year, too. They've been entrenched in that spot for a while. If possible, it's got worse. And, we've talked about the Carlson and the Hoffman deal. And then, of course, there's the other assistant coach thing that's going on where he was apparently harassing a 19-year-old female bus driver. And this is an organization that's really in a huge chasm right now, and I don't want to pile on the fans in any way, so that's as much as I'm going to touch on that. 30th, I have Vancouver. Now, Vancouver's dropped, and I'm going to tell you why Vancouver's dropped. They went on a nice run at the end of the year, which pulled them up to 23 in the power rankings. Fine, great. Some of the guys who are responsible for that, and I'm talking about Mont and Jokinen, who oddly enough brought over from Columbus, kind of made the team better down the stretch, which didn't help their draft ranking. So while they finished higher up and they went on a nice run, what I'm hearing about them potentially trading the number 7 draft pick is troubling. Because, again, it makes it sound like Jim Benning believes the team is further along than they really are. Yes, Pettersson's going to be fine, but I'm telling you, if Noah Dobson's available at 7 and they've traded that draft pick with something else so they can get Noah Hannafin. Hannafin is a great player. Do not get me wrong. But I really think that if they pile on a bunch of assets to get him, including this number 7 pick, I think they're going to regret it very, very quickly. Absolutely think they're going to regret it very, very quickly. So, and that's one of those rumors that's out there, and the number 7 draft pick has been in the rumors enough lately that I'm concerned. As somebody who's seen Benning do that before, where he is traded for an older player who's a little bit further along in his development with the idea that, hey, this can help us right now and we can make a push for the playoffs. I am wondering how many times that's happened where maybe even if he won the trade, he actually hurt the team long term because they weren't able to get that higher draft pick, that better prospect later on. Number 29, I have the Rangers. I do anticipate the Rangers moving up this board quickly. I anticipate by July 1st they're going to move up. Either they're going to have three first round draft picks, and they're going to have signed somebody in free agency, combined with the prospects that are coming up like Anderson and Hedel, and this could be quite the team come the fall. But for right now, I still have them at 29th. 28th, Montreal. And the saddest part is I keep reading Montreal in search of a center. Yep. I know. Montreal fans are aware of that, and I'm sure the Montreal dressing room's aware of that. They've tried Drouin. They've tried Galchenyuk. They will likely try others. There may very well be somebody in the draft who can help. I may be brutalizing it, but I believe it's Kotkaniemi is a guy who may have turned the eyes of Bergevin. Now, I have to say, too, again, if Bergevin passes on drafting Zadina, this is only if, and trades down to draft Kotkaniemi because he needs a center, that's the kind of short-term thinking that gets GMs fired. I am a huge believer in drafting best player available. When you're that early in the draft, you draft the best player available. If you trade a Philip Zadina just so you can get a guy who plays center, you're crazy. It's crazy. Zadina brings a whole other game, so hopefully those rumors are not true. 27, Detroit. It's likely that Detroit and Vancouver are in a similar position. Their goaltending is their goaltending. Their defense is there's some young guys that may make a difference, and their forward crew is still in development. So of the teams that are on the board, if Ottawa can get it together, they can get back to the playoffs. But that getting it together is a huge if right now. And if the Rangers can truly do the kind of turnaround that they're expected to do this summer, they can get back in the playoffs as well. Detroit, I don't know. In Montreal, it's tough to foresee too, but they definitely need Carey Price to play about 60 games to have any chance. 26, Chicago. The Hawks are an interesting team. So the rumor is that Falk and Darling from Carolina would be a good fit there. And I often wonder when I see these rumors, how many of these come from actual conversations and how many of it is just some reporter going, you know what works? This. I've never done it, and I never will. I may speculate on a UFA and say where I think he might work. Tavares being an obvious example, but I don't speculate on trades because it just gets crazy. And as soon as the last thing I ever want to see is that I've speculated a trade and then see it on Twitter, see other people talking about it, and then it just takes off. I don't want to see that. That just doesn't interest me. 25 is Calgary. There's issues with that core. We'll see if a new coach makes a difference, and we'll see what they do this summer. Do they buy out Brouwer? The buyout period starts tomorrow. Now, if they can buy out Brouwer, and if they can start making the changes to the roster necessary to improve the team, get them not only to the playoffs, but for them to be a team that can win in said playoffs, that would be huge. But it's up in the air, and then I look at their backup goaltender deal, and I'm saying to myself, so is Gillies going to be the guy? Is that the way they're going to go? Or are they going to go with Riddick? Is Smith going to be able to stay healthy at full 82? Like, there's a lot of questions I have, and we'll see what happens with them at the draft because, of course, their number one draft pick went to the Islanders for Hamonic. So, at number 24 is New York Islanders. Now, what they do with those two draft picks, what they do with 11 and 12, whether they use them to try to move up or if they try to trade one of them, the Islanders' whole offseason and how it's going to be perceived will really depend on the Tavares deal. Now, there's some saying that the firing of Waite and Snow was done to keep Tavares, and there are some saying that John Tavares had made a precondition of staying that Doug Waite was kept on as coach. The idea being they got rid of Doug Waite, therefore there's no chance that John Tavares comes back. And I haven't reported on it because I don't know what's true and what isn't, and it's all mere speculation at this point. 23, Edmonton. If you're an Oilers fan, I do think there's hope for next year because it can't be as bad as it was this last season. I think this last season made everything look worse than it is. I don't think Clefbaum is that bad. I don't think that Sekera can be that bad again. And I think Talbot's going to have a bounce back year. That being said, they do need to add somebody on defense. And they do need to figure out who's going to play on what line up front. And again, if they trade Lucic, I don't know who's going to come in and play his role. I've seen people saying, well, Cassian can do it. But Cassian can't put up goals like Lucic has been able to do and as he's being paid to do. Cassian is not as offensively gifted as Lucic can be. Notice I'm saying can be, not is. And I remember from when he was a Canuck, I would see games of Cassian's where I'd be like, man, this kid looks great. And then for a while it would just disappear. So you get 5 or 6 games where like, this kid looks awesome, and then 10 or 12 where he was invisible. 22, Buffalo. I truly believe that Dahlin's going to make a big difference. The question I get from Sabres fans all the time is, but does it make it makes a playoff team? I don't think so. I don't think it gets them into the playoffs, but at least it makes their back end a heck of a lot better than what it's been. And then it's a matter of what do you do with the goaltending? Does the goaltending get fixed, or is this going to get fixed? What's going to happen with that? In 21st spot, Dallas, who always have a question in goal and always seem to have depth issues on the blue line. Heiskanen coming in could help. Keeping the young guys that they've got together could definitely help. And if Ben Bishop could stay healthy, that would help. Although I do think Ben Bishop is coming out of his prime years, which is not good news for Dallas fans. And I'm going to be very interested to see what they do in the offseason. Rumors of them being in on Kovalchuk. Well, everybody's in on Kovalchuk. I don't have any reason to do a video when Kovalchuk is doing a tour of basically the entire United States. Other than to tell Canadian hockey fans, hey, Kovalchuk's not coming to your city. 20, Arizona. The Coyotes had that excellent second half of the season. Antti Ranta played, I think, some of the best goaltending we saw all year. It was ignored because he plays in Arizona, but he has established himself as a starting goaltender in the NHL, and I think there are enough good young pieces in Arizona that I think they're going to surprise people next year. But I'll be interested to see what they do in the draft. Do they try to trade up? Do they go to Montreal and go, hey, for that number 3 draft pick, we could give you Dylan Strome. The guy plays center. And Bergevin says, okay. Number 19, the Carolina Hurricanes, one of the more tumultuous teams in the offseason. Named aptly in this case because Carolina, Waddell's an odd one to pick to run your team, and yet it's obvious Tom Dundon's making the decisions. Word has it now that he put out the notice that everybody was available in Carolina except for Sebastian Aho, with the idea of trying to gauge the value of everybody on the market. Now, whatever the reason may be, I do wonder exactly what Carolina's going to do. I have some concerns. And I say that as somebody that wants to see Carolina succeed. I want to see them back in the playoffs. I think that would be fun to see them back in the playoffs. 18, St. Louis. Going to be a very interesting team to watch in the next few weeks. Does the general manager see them as a potential contender, or is he going to try to do some kind of a retool? The decisions he makes over the next few weeks will decide that. Does he get in on David Perron if he becomes a UFA and say back to St. Louis? Or does he simply decide to let the kids play? Guys like Kyrou, he can give them a spot in the lineup and see what happens. It'll be interesting to watch what they do this summer. St. Louis is one of those teams that probably should have been in the playoffs, but just wasn't. And goaltending is going to be interesting too, because odds are they lose their backup this summer. And what do you do with Jake Allen? 17 is Florida. Florida, of course, the team rated the highest that missed the playoffs. I didn't put any teams that made the playoffs in this bottom row ahead or behind 16 because I didn't want to start moving teams that were in the playoffs out of the top 16 and have fans saying, well, wait, why did you do that? Our team finished ahead of them, or our team did better. So I'm going to leave the whole playoff hierarchy kind of the way it is for now. And then I'll play around with that after the draft and once we get into free agency. This is not going to be a week-by-week thing. It's going to be during the offseason as I think it deserves a video like now. 16, I have the Kings. The Kings are in a tight spot. They made the playoffs, yes. They got swept in the first round, also yes. And where are they at? Where are they at? They won the Cup in 2012, 2014. Do you hold on to that and say these guys are winners? Or do you look and say, well, maybe it's time to start taking some of this apart? And that's a big decision that the brain trust in LA has to make up their minds with. Yes, they've been linked to Kovalchuk as well, because I think by the time the 1st of July rolls around, he'll have visited every American team there is. 15 is the Ducks. Of course, they also got swept in the first round, and now since then, we've learned that Ryan Kessler likely misses all of next season. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Kessler either, but losing him for an entire year is going to affect this team. And then you look at Corey Perry, rumors that they may be looking at trading him. And one of the rumors that's out there that's driving me nuts is they asked Corey Perry for a list of teams he'd be willing to be traded to during last season. So this rumor being out there right now seems weird because they're not saying that they've asked him again. They're saying they asked him during the season, or it's come out that they asked him during the season. It doesn't mean he's being shopped right now or that there's any market for him. May very well be that they looked and the market return wasn't worth getting rid of him, even though having that money from his contract gone would be very useful. The problem is, of course, there's not many teams that would take that contract and not want to give you a crappy one back. So that's the problem. 14 is the Wild, who are, of course, in the middle. This is kind of where the Wild have been for the last few years. They're not quite in a contending position. They're not in a rebuild position. They're good. There's some really good pieces here. They're not fantastic at any one spot. And it kind of leaves you holding in that spot. Now, their blue line, I like quite a bit. Do they take some of those pieces on the blue line, move them around, and maybe look at moving somebody out so they can upgrade somewhere else? Maybe. But I wouldn't be surprised if we go into the season and they're still on about 14th. 13th is the Devils. And again, for people who are aware of my previous power rankings, I'm going to get a lot of weight. These teams didn't move. A lot of them didn't. Because there really hasn't been a lot of movement. The Devils are in an interesting spot as well. Is Corey Schneider their starter this fall, or what are they going to do with Kincaid? Kincaid played really well, so what are they going to do with Keith Kincaid? That's going to be the interesting question. What do they do with their goaltending, and do they try to turn Schneider or Kincaid into another asset? Is that what they're going to do? At 12, Philly. So now we're still in first round elimination territory here. All teams are eliminated in the first round. Philly, when you look at what happened to Pittsburgh in the second round, you have to ask yourself, was Philly closer than we thought? If not for these mental lapses they had in that first round matchup, could they have actually knocked off the Penguins after you see what the Capitals did to them? Or are the Flyers further away because you can see what the Capitals did to the Penguins? Does this mean the Flyers are in danger of falling out of the playoffs next year? There are definitely teams that are in this top row who will fall out of the playoffs next year, and they're going to be teams that we don't expect, because there are a lot of teams that missed this year that we didn't expect to miss the playoffs this year either. Number 11 is the Avalanche. And I think of the teams that are in this top row, I think Colorado's going to be one that people are like, yeah, they'll fall out of the playoffs. And there's some concern in goal, I think. There was one rumor I heard out there with their goaltending, and I thought it was a bit of a head scratcher in terms of trying to upgrade their backup position. And I still think that Varlamov long-term isn't going to be their starter, and they need to have some sort of a replacement there. But it's a really tough spot that they find themselves in. Number 10, Columbus. Again, we're still in the teams that got eliminated in the first round. Columbus, after seeing what the Capitals did going to the Stanley Cup final, I could have justified moving Columbus up to 9th, because Columbus gave Washington, I think, more trouble than anybody else did. And if Columbus wins that game 3, odds are the Capitals are not your current Stanley Cup champions. So Columbus may very well be closer than it appears, even though they didn't get out of the first round this year. Number 9, I should say, is Toronto. And again, I'm going to throw this out there. I think Toronto is a lot closer than a lot of people do. I think that as long as they don't panic, and this summer, Kyle Dubas, he doesn't seem like the panicky type. As long as Dubas doesn't panic and make some silly move to try to quickly fix something that I don't think's that broken, I think there's going to be a lot of focus on what happened this year and comparing it with 2013, which is fine, but it's a completely different team. It's a completely different circumstance. It just happened to be against the Bruins as well, so it magnifies that, right? I do think Toronto is still on the right path, and I think that this coming season is going to be a big year for Toronto. And I would not be surprised if they end up finishing first in their division. I'll put that out there. Number 8. So now we're into teams that got eliminated in the second round. Boston, I have an 8th. I think there was some overachieving that happened with Boston this year. I think there were some guys who had excellent seasons for the most part, and then kind of fell off. One example is Danton Heinen, who over the last 20 games, including playoffs, I think he had 1 goal. And he really wasn't expected to be the player that he was for Boston this year. It was a pleasant surprise. So he could fall back. There's other players that could fall back. Maybe a guy like Bjork can rediscover things, not having to worry about an injury-riddled season, and maybe he's healthier in the fall and he can help with the scoring. But There's a lot of pieces with Boston that I look at and I say I wouldn't be surprised to see them miss the playoffs this year. I wouldn't. But I predicted them to miss the playoffs in 2018, so if they don't miss them in 2019, it just shows that every year I'll predict they miss, and they don't. Number 7, San Jose. I think if you look at the teams in the West that played against Vegas, I think San Jose gave them the most headaches. San Jose showed that through the most part of that series, they didn't seem to be in awe of whatever Vegas was doing, and they played really, really well. It was a very close series. Vegas wins it in 6, but it's a close series, and I think that the lessons learned in this series could be huge for San Jose this year. Of course, if they can get Tavares, and they've been rumored with Tavares, especially if Thornton retires, they get that extra cap space. Tavares could be the one to send them right up. So these guys could very well be up in the 3 or 4 range the next time I do power rankings, which will likely be. We'll see how much movement there is at the draft. And then we'll go from there. But for me, I think I'll probably do another power rankings after free agency's kind of settled down. Number 6, Pittsburgh. Seeing Washington win the Stanley Cup should feel pretty good for Penguins fans because it means you lost to the Stanley Cup champion. And it means that the Penguins really aren't that far off. For all of the slings and arrows thrown at Matt Murray, the guy's a kid. For all of these slings and arrows being thrown at Phil Kessel and discussions of his relationship with Mike Sullivan, honestly, they won 2 Stanley Cups the first 2 years Kessel was there. I really think they'll work it out. I'd be very surprised if he gets moved. And I know the rumors are all over the place Kessel's going to go, but I'd be surprised if it happens because at his price point, yes, it does cause Pittsburgh to push up against the cap, and they save a lot of money by getting rid of Kessel, but they also lose a lot of goals and points that aren't easily replaced if Kessel is gone. You can't look at a guy like Sprong and say, okay, you're going to go in the lineup now and be Phil Kessel, and then, in free agency, pick somebody up for $3 million, $4 million, and go, okay, and between you and Sprong, you'll make up the difference. It's a horrible formula, and when a team's won Stanley Cups like they have, don't mess it up. Don't change things up too much. Number 5, I have Nashville. I think Nashville still has a shot, but I do think their window is closing. And the concerning thing for me in Nashville really is up against Winnipeg. The fact that they don't have that big number 1 center was kind of exposed in that series. And then Rinne not having the playoff this year he had last year. And just looking at the career numbers of Pekka Rinne's in the playoffs. And last year's playoff was fantastic. But every year before that and this year his numbers have been pedestrian. So that has to be somewhat concerning. And then the fact that he's 35, will be 36 next year. They need to figure out who's going to replace him. Is it going to be Saros? If it's going to be Saros, you got to give him some starts and a shot as soon as possible. Number 4, so now we're into semifinalists. I have Winnipeg at 4. I know that everybody keeps mentioning how the Jets were crowned in a Future Watch article by the Hockey News as your 2019 Stanley Cup champions. And I want to say that was 3 years ago in Future Watch they said that. And last year they said they were wrong. Last year they said, we made that silly prediction that the Capitals are going to win the Stanley Cup in 2019. Now it's come back up again because now the Jets. The Jets are good again, so now they'll say, we made that prediction. So last year they're distancing themselves from the Jets prediction, and this year like, we said that. It's so weird. And whether the Jets are or not contenders, this is an amazing distance that they've traveled. And I do think that they have an excellent chance of actually improving their team in the offseason. And experience for guys like Laine and Hellebuck, it's only going to make them better. At 3, I have Tampa. So your cap wizard, Steve Yzerman, has a chance this offseason to do his wizardry again and potentially figure out the draft wizardry for Kucherov. I wouldn't be waiting until next year. I wouldn't be waiting until even the start of the season. I'm sitting down with Nikita Kucherov now and saying, so where do we think we're going to end up with this? And I'm trying to come up with a number and agree on a number so that when next year's cap apocalypse hits Tampa again, you've already got a number figured out with Kucherov because you're not losing him. He got rattled in the conference finals. He did. He got rattled, and I thought that he was less effective with what Washington did to him. But honestly, he's still one of the best players in the league. Number 2, of course, is Vegas, which means number 1 is Washington. And I want to remark about something here because it's worth noting. During this year's power rankings, the Capitals were never number 1 on my board. It never happened. Vegas was number 1. Tampa was number 1. Winnipeg was number 1. Nashville was number 1. Pittsburgh made it to number 1. Boston was number 1. Toronto was number 1. San Jose never made it that far, and the Capitals were never number 1 on the board. Vegas has some personnel decisions to make. I'm kind of surprised that we're not seeing re-signings yet. I thought that as soon as the smoke cleared on their Stanley Cup finals and the celebration and parades that have been going on, I thought immediately we'd hear about re-signings. We haven't heard it yet. But I think Vegas is probably going to get better. And by saying get better, I don't mean that they're going to do better than the 109 points they had this year. I don't even mean that they're going to win their division again. What I mean is the team, with this experience, with the core that they have, which is actually pretty good, they can add to it. And they can add to it substantially. And bring in a guy like Cody Glass in the fall, which is going to add that youthful rookie dynamic. I really think they're going to be back. Now, I'm not predicting for a Stanley Cup, but I think that as a team, I think they're going to get better. And I think Vegas will win a Stanley Cup at some point. And I don't think it's going to make people happy when they do. The Capitals, John Carlson has been quoted as saying he'd love to stay in Winnipeg, but he wants to see what market value is. And who can blame him? I don't think anybody can blame him. I don't think anybody's going to be mad at him. If you're 2 weeks away from finding out what you're worth, don't you want to find out? So you probably want to stay with the company that hired you, in this case, the team that hired you. You probably want to stay where you got hired. You probably want to stay home, but don't you want to find out the market value, what you're worth, so you can go back to your boss and say, hey, I'd love to come back. Here's what I'm worth. And then if your boss says, well, I can't pay you that, then you have to weigh, do I want to play for less and have a chance to win again? Or do I really believe if I go to this other place that I can help them win, I can help them become better? And not only that, but I'm also getting an extra $2 million a year, which is not small. And if he's playing in an Arizona or a Florida, taxes? What taxes? So there are some considerations to be made here, and I'm glad that Carlson's taking a route that's the right route. And it's not getting ugly, and hopefully it doesn't. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the guy who comes back home and fans boo him, sometimes it's a guy who had been popular and went somewhere else, and maybe it was a media thing, maybe it was whatever. It happens. It happens here and there. Anyways, there's your power rankings for June 14th, and it's highly likely this will be the last power rankings until July. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, and I'll talk to you again soon.